Good morning. Welcome. Thanks for joining me. Today may be a long video. You may wish to fast forward. I'll have a go at putting timestamps in the content so you can zoom to relevant parts. Because I'm talking about my life in engineering. I was born in 1950, started an apprenticeship in 1966, and then went on to work in engineering all my life. Smith Docks. What can I remember? What can I say? It was an amazing grounding for heavy engineering. Smith Docks built, launched and maintained ships. At this point I have to express my opinion that you search out ships being launched in the 60s and 70s. We were based on a river, as you may well guess, the River Tees in this instance. We built and launched ships across the river. How did we stop them going right across the river? We held them back with massive chains. So the launch procedure was quite exciting. The take-up of slack as all of the chains tightened and tried to slow down the ship. These gigantic structures were just hulls usually at this point, but they still weighed a fair bit. Once launched, they were steered into position alongside one of the jetties, steered using the famous tugs. To witness this, along with other shipyard activity of cranes and massive machinery, big hammers. Can you imagine a 40-pound hammer? We used to call it a Monday hammer. Balancing on a plank in a dock bottom, working on the ship's propeller, tightening or untightening the big nut with this 40-pound hammer. It was a skill in itself, and the fitters we look up to and try to emulate and eventually became could use these large tools with consummate ease. Mentioning cranes, the first time I ever stepped off the roof of a crane onto the jib was absolutely heart in the mouth stuff. But we did it. We did it regularly. We did it with tools on our back. These cranes were like palaces, and the crane drivers kept them immaculate. Everything was sparkling brass and chrome. There was certainly a few characters in Smith Docks, crane drivers to name some. Learning basic fitting skills in all the various departments set me up for life, gave me a liking for spanners. To this day, I still get pleasure from picking up a spanner in my workshop. It takes me away. Talking of spanners, a little aside. When you started as Smith Docks in the mid-60s, you were given £25 to buy a set of tools as a mechanical fitter. I chose 9 brittle double-ended ring spanners, a hacksaw which I still have today, and various other tools to make up my tool bag when working within Smith Docks. It was an indentured apprenticeship, which meant my father had to sign to say that I would attend regularly, and I did. Smith Docks' principle was that when you became a man, a fitter, round about the 20 to 21 age, they would like you to leave Smith Docks, go elsewhere, work in engineering, and then after proving yourself, you were welcomed back. I did this. I left Smith Docks just after I was 20 and went abroad to Germany, HDW. They were building submarines on the coast of Kiel. And from there, I just got hooked onto the contracting lifestyle and travelled at home and abroad for other engineering companies. So that was the mid-60s to the mid-70s. The mid-70s was the oil boom. I saw an advert in the local paper, applied, and was successful to work offshore. I joke about the safety standards in those days, and this is my take on it. Your medical and safety checks were, did your overalls fit? Those were the days where you were treated like gods, flew everywhere, grand hotels, helicopter from Dice, the terminal in Aberdeen, to the rig. Mine happened to be 150 miles offshore in the North Sea on the northeast coast. I started work for Brit Oil. You got amazing clothing, waterproofs, thermals, including one-piece suit and hat. I never did wear the one-piece suit at work. It was just too hot. But the clothing and the conditions were amazing. The food on board was fantastic. Steaks as far as the eye can see. Yes, you worked long hours. We were commissioning techs, building a rig. You worked long hours, either day shift or night shift. In the early days, we worked 4 weeks on the rig and had 1 week off at home. That week went very quick at home. You were soon back. But that's how you got your money together for your family life at home. So we just got on with it. I was an active member of a local workmen's club where I lived in North Ormsby, Middlesbrough, and it was called Teesside Bridge Club, named after an engineering works just down the road. I went through periods of playing a lot of darts and a lot of snooker. Getting back to the rigs. The rigs only had pool tables. Yes, it was pinned, the rig that is, to the seabed. So the pool tables were relatively static, but it ruined my snooker. Playing pool all the time. When I came home, I struggled with the snooker. I was never the same. What was offshore like? Papers were delivered. We read newspapers those days. They were delivered en masse by helicopter. Think of thousands of newspapers, and on a Sunday, all the various newspapers and Sunday supplements. But it was a break in the monotony of life of 12 hours on and 12 hours off, sharing a cabin with multiple other people. So it was a break from the monotony of the North Sea. Yes, we did get letters and you looked forward to the mail. Did we have phones? No such thing as mobiles. We did have access to telephones, but it was short and sweet. It was mainly for safety. When you work away, I can guarantee that there'll be some crisis at home, craving you back to sort it. Well, when you're in a rig in the middle of the North Sea, you can't just do that easily. So yourself and your family have to muddle through, deal with it. And we did. So, building rigs, commissioning them 4 weeks on, and then maybe tools in the toolbox, put into a container, never to be seen again. You went to another rig and you were issued with all new stuff again. Costs must have been astronomical. Over the next 20 years, the conditions would deteriorate. The travel would be less luxurious. The food would be more budget conscious. But the work-home lifestyle was improved considerably. The rigs went from 4 on, 1 off to 2 on, 2 off. It was like having a mini holiday. Each 2 weeks you got to do something and actually spend some of your money. When you're on 12 hours in the North Sea throughout the seasons, you need sustenance. As I said earlier, the food was amazing. The beginning of the shift, mid-shift, the end of the shift, and you could go in and have a meal which was the middle of somebody else's shift, should you so choose. There were coffee shops dotted on each deck of the rig. Yes, you all became frequent users. Some shifts you just moved from coffee shop to coffee shop as if you'd just come in. Reading, talking, shooting the fat, putting the world to rights, meeting old friends, making new friends. It was a full lifestyle. The best sound in the world was hearing that helicopter Sikorsky S-61N as it made its way in for you to go on leave. That was the best sound in the world. As you flew in over the UK, you saw the mainland as a patchwork quilt of fields. Some people just slept the whole journey, some read, some listened to music, and some looked out the window. I like to figure out where I was in the flight path. The helicopter would make its way to the terminal, usually Dice, near Aberdeen. There you would transfer to Aberdeen Airport and then a flight home. After visiting the bar, of course, there was always time to kill between getting off the plane and picking up a local connection. Aberdeen Bar was a terror. You could not get out of it sober. There was always somebody wanting to buy you a drink and shake your hand. They were on the way out, you were on your way home. You arrived at Teesside, or I did, merrily happy to be met by my wife, to which she would sometimes announce, I suppose you want me to drive. We drove home the 10 or so mile to our beautiful bungalow where we had our family, my wife, and then soon to be 3 boys. My wife, I'm afraid, passed in 2009. My wife, in the early days, was a nurse. I soon convinced her she had to go about her to apply for a sister's post, and she flew through it. So she was a nursing sister in theatre, well respected among the nursing community. We had some fancy cars those days. We liked MGs. Vanessa would roar off in the MG, loving it. The mechanical engineering work was interesting, but it didn't fulfill my dreams. I explored the world of ROVs, remote operated vehicle, and realised that if I retrained, which I did, in industrial robotics, I could apply for ROV pilots' jobs. Manoeuvring one of these mini-sized vehicles on an umbilical cord as it cruised around the rig well below the surface and sometimes at the seabed was called flying. So that's how I'll refer to it. We did get issued with a pilot's log, and although I haven't seen one, it reminded me of a log that an aviator might have. It showed the mission, the rig, the task, the duration, the tasks undertaken, and the conclusion. These were daily logs signed by our supervisor. You were part of a small team, 4 of you usually, electrician, yourself as mechanical, and 2 others. One would be a supervisor and the second might be another supervisor or discipline. You sat side by side in a darkened control room while flying these ROVs. The setup was like this. The ROV sat on the deck near the side of the rig. It had an umbilical which was 90 odd cables all in one conductor, and this umbilical was long enough to enable the ROV to reach the seabed. This umbilical was coiled around a winch. Now this umbilical also had the lifting power to lift the ROV off the deck and control it in the water. We also had a winch. This winch was to control the cable, and we had a crane of some sorts, more like a HIAB or a JCB, a hydraulic crane. So the task needed one person sat in front of the pilot's console in the darkened room. A person sat alongside him, the co-pilot, working the manipulator arm and any other tasks that the pilot might need. And on the deck, somebody controlling the crane and then the winch. So you all had to be coordinated. When did you operate? You were at the beck and call of the drill team, and they were pretty flippant about your work. You were there just to support them and provide eyes and manipulators to do things. So it was not unknown for the drill crew to shout, "Jump the ROV! Jump the ROV!" And there was hell to pay if you weren't in the water within minutes of the call. You may be having a meal, you may be at the cinema, you may be sat in the control shack, you may be maintaining the ROV, but you had to respond to the drill crew's needs. What sort of things did we support the drill crew with? During drilling, each drill string is lowered onto the BOP. What's a BOP? A blowout preventer. I'll set the scenario. Imagine there's an oil field mapped out on the seabed, a template with 24 entrances, relatively close together, closer than you would imagine. The BOP attached to one of these entrances, all watched by the ROV, and then the drill strings load onto the ROV, creating a chain of pipes from the BOP to the surface. Once they had sufficient pipes, they could put valves on this pipeline and then proceed to drill down into the seabed through the template and then off at an angle, and they went miles away from this template, and that was how you got an oil field. Each of these guides in the template were a separate drilling. The template also had what we called bullseyes. These were liquid filled domes with a massive ball bearing in, moving about on something that was like a bullseye. We would fly the ROV down to the bullseye and see that the template was sitting with this bullseye central. This would indicate that it hadn't moved and it was safe to continue. Oil rig templates do suffer movement sometimes. The North Sea is not a static object. Things do change, and there are risk of gas bubbles permeating through the seabed and causing problems. It's extreme, but rigs have been known to sink in gas bubbles. Just concentrate on that for a minute. A rig with all its tonnage, people, equipment can float on seawater. It can't float in gas. So we've been asked sometimes to sit on the seabed and watch for gas bubbles. The seabed is prone to have lots of silt, and if we were to just sit anywhere as we touch down, all of this silt would be disturbed, and it may take minutes, if not hours, to get visibility back. This wasn't any good for our task, so we may pick a pylon that's in the seabed unused and sit atop the pylon but still close to the seabed and watch the area for gas bubbles. I should say all of this work was taped on videotape. We had 2 cameras on the ROV and a manipulator arm. One camera was an SIT, silicon intensified target. It could see in the dark, but of course it was black and white. And there was a colour camera. Once they'd seen it, the drill crew always wanted the colour close up. Can you do this? Can you move in? Can you do? The demands were absolutely amazing. I did have some funny times though. Once over, a drill crew came charging in the control cabin and said, "Could you have a look at that valve down on the seabed?" And he thought he was looking at it live because the video was replaying, maybe being edited, but replaying on the screens. When in actual fact, he'd passed the ROV on the deck on the way in. Oh dear, we had to break it to him that this was a videotape, and we would launch the ROV to get this live footage. Was it enjoyable? Yes, it was enjoyable. High pressure work. I'll give you an example of how high the pressure was. I was working as a co-pilot alongside a supervisor who'd been in the ROV world for many years, and he was popping indigestion tablets like those sweets. The task we were on was to approach and explore members of the structure below the surface. Imagine multiple vertical legs and then diagonal legs bracing the structure of the oil rig. The task was to launch the ROV, start the video, fly down to the member that we were to inspect, attach the clamp around the member, take readings, and then write on the drawing the updated readings for whether the member was flooded or not. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. How can oil rigs operate with known flooded members? Well, they do. A certain percentage of all oil rig legs are flooded through various reasons, and as long as that is within the guidelines for safe operation, the rig is allowed to carry on. So we flew down to this member, attached the clamp around the member, and the supervisor declared it flooded. When looking at the drawing, it hadn't been declared flooded previously, and it was of immediate danger. The rig went into overdrive. Helicopters were called. The rig was set to evacuate. It was pandemonium. People were moving to supply boats. This rig was about to be shut down at the expense of many thousands of pounds due to the cessation of drilling. But the supervisor had made a mistake. Even though he was popping his indigestion pills, he wasn't quite on the ball. The rig is a big structure. The ROV goes through this structure by going in to the structure, down, left, right, across, over. It can be quite convoluted to arrive at the brace or beam or leg that you're trying to test. I'll keep it simple. He turned left instead of right and clamped the flooded member gauge around a rig leg which had already been checked and was acceptable as flooded. So his mistake of turning left instead of right took him to an old member, not a new member. Once corrected, everything settled down again on the rig, but his credibility was shot. We brought the rig worker ROV to the surface, and he had to pass over to another supervisor. So that was how little mistakes can have big consequences offshore. It's been a while. I'm going to have a break now and rejoin. Part 2 of my video entitled Engineering for My Working Life. Earlier I discussed retraining. I did a short retraining stint in industrial robotics to make me more employable. The course I went on was a small course. A dozen or so of us participants built a project and then demonstrated the project to industrial robotics companies. There was lots of stuff to learn, drawings, theory, hydraulics, pneumatics, electronics, and of course robotics. The course was very competitive, and it was marked along the way. I was sat next to a chap, and it turned out that we would be top and second in all exams leading to the final exam. So that was pretty cool. Other students in the class would try and copy your work, steal your drawings. So I became adept at hiding my CAD drawings deep nested into folders on the hard drive of the network, so it couldn't easily be copied. But then, just to make sure of my unique entries into the robotics world, I drew everything by hand as well as CAD. So this supplemented my drawing, helped me understand more about what I was doing, and showed off my work. Towards the end of the course, we were encouraged to send off CVs to potential companies. I can't remember the exact numbers, so forgive me, but let's say I sent off 40 CVs. Now, the course supplied writing materials and stamps. Or did they? No, I think that's where the disagreement about sending off CVs came about. I sent off 40 odd CVs across the region to industrial robotics companies. Fellow participants on the course challenged me. Why would I spend 40 stamps and 40 letters? Why would I do it? And my answer was simple. If you were offered a job in robotics for 50 quid, would you pay it? I would. Needless to say, I was the only one on the course to get offered a work in full-time robotics. The only other person to be associated with anything robotics type industry was the chap who sat beside me and came first or second on every module along with me. He got a job selling industrial ball bearings, so that's a bit of a stretch from robotics, but that's the facts. My success with the CVs was British Aerospace and Denichi Sykes Robotics. 2 job offers. I went to both interviews and chose Denichi Sykes Robotics. This was exciting times. PCs still in their infancy. Robotics still trying to find its feet. And here I was asking if I wanted to go on a course and program a robot. On the course, which was over in Preston, and I was travelling during the week and staying over and coming back weekends. On the course, I learned to program using their software. And would you believe, I hope you sat down, it was all on tape. Now anybody that's had an audio tape recording knows about the media that comes out of the player and then destroys itself. Or if you're lucky, you can wind it back on to the tape using a pencil. Yes, we used tapes to record the movements of the robot. We had a pendant which we physically moved with our arms and hands. Maybe you moved 20 in the X and 30 in the Y and 40 in the Z. So it was learning positions, not relative to anything else, just in space. I completed the course and was sent to join a team which were working at GKN Sankey, further down south from Preston. The team was working 24 hours to program this gigantic robot to trace the outlines of some welds on a Warrior tank. The Warrior tank at that time was called the MCV-80. Armour-plated alloy, normal tank-sized tank, had the potential to carry a dozen men as well as the crew, had a big gun on the front. It was amazing to see on the test range as it bombed along at around about 60 miles an hour, and the gun kept on station no matter where the tank drove. It was amazing. The job, or the work cell, was the tank placed in the jaws and tailstock of a gigantic lathe. The tank had no internals, no turret, and it was under control through the program, so I could rotate the tank body and then position the robot focal point along the welds, and I, along with my team members, would trace the outline of these welds for processing. A little side note, talking to welders on site, they were obviously top of their game, but they always anticipated the start and the end of a weld, whereas the robot didn't. It could start, move linearly along, in and out, up and down, and then stop. Brilliant. Let me just remind you, this was the mid-80s. The computer software was always under development. It could run away. To see a massive industrial robot running away is quite disconcerting. We kept these runaways to a minimum and the software got better. As I was programming in the work cell with a pendant driving the robot focal point towards the tank, I would drive it to a point, save the coordinates, drive it to the next point, save those coordinates, and carry on until I'd completed a weld. At the end of each day, we backed up and saved our tape and passed it on to the next employee who carried on programming. I ended up on the night shift. I finished at 4 in the morning. I quite enjoyed that. I was going fishing during some mornings, going to play snooker some days, and then I'd go to work. And when I finished work, I would go back to the hotel and have a drink or two with the night porter. And he always looked after me. I think San Miguel was my tipple, and chicken drumsticks were always available for me to enjoy. We talked the night away until I decided I would have a few hours sleep. And I did this daily throughout my work period at GKN Sankey. Also during the night, we would be warned sometimes that a trade delegation would appear in the work cell, and at this point we were to do nothing special but always have a channel ready to demonstrate what the robot could do, so to show off its moves, but all with the concern that the last thing we wanted was a runaway. And this was completed. These people, international in the looks, very expensive suits, so people of some standing in the community were coming in and viewing the Warrior MCV-80, part of Britain's firepower. I guess some of them were going to buy the MCV-80 for their own armies. Who knows? We never did ask or get told. So that was working in robotics. It was very challenging, very interesting, and gave me a love even more for tech, CAD, software, and building stuff. Since leaving robotics, I've worked in a number of industries and businesses closer to home. But that winds up the big projects in heavy engineering that I've worked in since 1966. Thanks for watching. Join me again soon.